So welcome everyone to this TDAG seminar on how education in schools can encourage resilience for urban treescapes. This is a subject that Trees and Design Action Group take very seriously. As far as Trees and Design Action Group is concerned, we're a network and forum that brings people and organizations together to support the role of urban trees through better collaboration in planning, design, construction, management, and maintenance of our urban places. And evidence-based information is really important to us, to our presentations today, and so is knowledge exchange and cross-sector working. And so to you, the audience, we really encourage your questions and participation. Now, our partners today represent a really broad industry interest. We've got the Chartered Institute of Ecology and Environmental Management, the Chartered Institute of Foreigners, the Institution of Civil Engineers, the Institute of Highway Engineers, and the Landscape Institute. So to introduce our chair for today, Paul Vere, Chair of the Trustees of the National Association of Environmental Education. And I'm going to put the link to that on the website because I think it's a really significant organization, and a senior lecturer in research and development at the University of Gloucester. So Paul, over to you.
Thank you very much, Sue. And it's great that so many people are on the call today. And it's a pleasure to be here at this session. It's the reason I was quite interested to be involved myself is because it certainly speaks to my career, which started a long time ago, not as long as the NAEE has been around. National Association for Environmental Education started in 1971. So we're well over 50 years old now. But I started in the 1980s working in an urban wildlife group. So dressing up, scaring children in the woods, and then planting trees, thousands some winters, with children very carefully guarding the roots and putting these young whips in the ground. And so it feels like full circle to me to see the speakers today and to see this whole kind of array of different people who are interested in this topic now. So it's great to be here. I won't go on about me anymore. I might jump in to help answer a question or two if it's about education specifically, but I know Freddie's here with that as well. Without further ado, I will move on to introduce our first speaker, which is Bethan Stagg, social scientist at Forest Research. She's going to talk to us about childhood experience of trees and other biodiversity, how this promotes pro-nature attitudes and behaviours. So Bethan, over to you. I'll turn my camera off like everybody else.
Hi everybody, so I'm just sharing my presentation. Can everybody see that okay?
Can you switch the screen again, Bethan, because we've got your speaker version.
There we go.
Yeah, you've got it, but there we go. Perfect. That's it.
Great. So I'm a social scientist in the Society Environment Research Group at Forest Research. We're the research agency of the Forestry Commission and Britain's primary research organisation for trees, woods and forests. And there's a link there in case you're not aware of our work and want to sign up for the quarterly newsletter. So I'm going to talk about two pieces of research around childhood experiences. The first is my long-standing research in plant awareness, and secondly, a recent review we've completed in Forest Research about childhood experience and adult behaviours. So plant awareness is a well-documented phenomenon that shows that people have low interest, attention, appreciation for wild plants compared to animals. So this is something that we've explored over the years, trying different approaches for increasing people's, particularly children's, awareness about wild plants and the important role they play in our environments. We've used approaches like memory games, educational drama, and plant foraging. And the kind of overall finding, I guess, of these kind of several years of work is that memorable experiences that gave the plants significance, purpose to people's lives, or some sorts of values people's lives, increased people's children's appreciation or interest. We also carried out 2 evidence reviews of research in education, ethnobotany and nature conservation. The reviews supported these findings and also pointed to the decline in first-hand experience of nature as being the direct cause of this phenomenon, plant blindness, in urbanized societies. And if you want to check out my papers, or I've produced about 20 videos for educational practitioners about plants on my YouTube channel. So talking now about our recent review that investigated relationships between childhood experiences of trees, woods and forests and adults' pro-environmental attitudes and behaviours. So there's basically mounting evidence about the importance of childhood nature experience for contributing to adult pro-environmental attitudes or behaviours. But we were aware there had been no review that specifically looked at trees, woodlands or forests. So this is what we sought to address. So we carried out a rapid evidence review based on the DEFRA guidance, which consists of several stages. So scoping stage to identify relevant reviews, landmark studies, developing search strategies, screening the retrieved articles against inclusion criteria. And what we found was 81 articles that assessed both childhood nature experience and adult environmental attitudes or behaviours. Only 17 of those focus specifically on childhood experience of trees, woodlands or forests. So those were the ones that interested us the most. There were 2 cases of duplicate reporting, so that's where authors had used the same data set in multiple studies. So that actually gave us 14 focal studies for quality assessment and synthesis. There were also 37 studies where trees featured in a kind of marginal way. So where there was a question about trees in the questionnaire or in the statements of the questionnaire tool, but then those were merged into a single statement. So effectively, any findings specific to trees or woodlands were lost and just kind of merged into broader finding around nature experience. So most of those 14 studies that we focused on were carried out in Sweden, the UK or Japan. They had quite a large sample size on average because many of them were based on surveys, questionnaires. And many of the studies, unfortunately, had significant flaws in experimental design, particularly where there were kind of risks of researcher bias in the way the data was collected or analysed. But those hadn't been addressed, and there were also kind of issues with respondent bias that hadn't been addressed. All the studies were based on adult recall of childhood memories, so we had no longitudinal studies that were kind of looking at change over time. It was all kind of relying on what adults could remember about their childhood experience. So what did we find out? What were our kind of main findings? So we found a strong association between childhood experience and adults' nature-related perceptions, mostly about their perceptions of trees or forests. So, for example, their preferences for forest recreational activities were positively associated with childhood experience of forests. 3 studies found that childhood experience was negatively associated with fear and disgust. So in other words, adults that visited woodlands infrequently as children were fearful of being in woodlands as adults, or were disgusted by woodland environments such as insects or sitting on logs. Whereas those that had regularly visited woodlands as children actually felt kind of comforted and inspired by those environments. Adults that lived adjacent to woodlands as children were more likely to agree that trees had a spiritual meaning for them. And then also common was a positive association between high levels of childhood experience and adult visits to woodland. So in other words, people that visited woodlands frequently as children continued to do so in adulthood. And results in those studies suggested that the visitation rate had to be quite frequent, at least weekly, for that to kind of have an impact on adult behaviours. What we were most interested in was did the childhood experience of trees and woodlands lead to adult pro-nature conservation behaviours? We only found one study that addressed that and found there was an association. And we were also interested to know what were the characteristics of trees and woodland that might be contributing to some of the relationships that were found. And whilst most of the studies did explore what the characteristics of those experiences were in woodlands as children, they didn't consider how they might be influencing adult behaviours, or how they might differ from other types of nature experiences. However, if we look at the wider literature, so this is kind of going outside of the review now and just looking at studies that look at childhood experience of woodland but don't consider adult behaviours, we do find that there are some kind of specific qualities about treed spaces that are appealing to children compared to other types of spaces. So, for example, one study found that children would actively choose to play in treed spaces compared to those spaces that didn't have many trees, and would engage more frequently in creative play when they're in woodlands compared to other environments. The amount of time pupils would spend outside was correlated with the number of trees in over 500 schools. So actually having more trees in the school grounds was encouraging children to kind of actually go and actively play in those areas. And what's quite interesting is the kind of play opportunities that woodlands provide. And this is something one study in particular kind of explored in depth over a 3-year period, where they observed children in a particular woodland and sought to categorize those different behaviors and just kind of try and understand what characterizes childhood experience in woodlands. And there are kind of two main themes in the kind of types of ways that children engage in with woodland and trees. So the first is the trees as producers of loose play materials. There's all sorts of ways in which trees produce loose play materials, whether it's piles of leaves or twigs or fruits and seeds, etc. That is very attractive to children and kind of really lends itself to a whole kind of suite of imaginative play scenarios. And then secondly, trees as 3-dimensional structures and spaces. So this was the second theme, is the role of trees obviously for climbing. That's the most obvious one. But also for just as furniture, in effect, a kind of meeting place or somewhere to sit and contemplate, and also the kind of overall three-dimensional environment that kind of offers escape from the wider world, and a kind of place of exploration and discovery that's kind of got a sense of escape. And so just to kind of summarize the kind of take-home messages, memorable and meaningful experiences of wild plants promotes awareness. Our evidence review found that childhood experience was associated with positive adult perceptions about trees and woodlands, and increased visitation rates. The broader literature shows that trees promote play by providing these 3-dimensional spaces and loose materials. And as you can see from our review, the evidence was quite limited about the impact of childhood experience of trees on pro-nature behaviours. So this is definitely an area where more research is needed, and that's something that we are kind of exploring with our research programme in forest research, and how we can kind of address these evidence gaps. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Beth, and kept us just ahead of time, which is fantastic. And I saw there's a question about research there in the chat from Sue, just about research that shows the wider benefits or co-benefits to education from working with in trees or being in a forest school, for example. Are you aware of anything that's...
Yeah, so there's substantial evidence about the benefits of forest school for a whole range of childhood developmental factors, mental health, well-being, cognitive development, emotional regulation, social benefits, etc. But there were no studies that attempted to link those experiences to adult health or attitude or behaviours. So that's why the review didn't pick up on it, because we were particularly interested in how those are affecting adult behaviours. So that's another evidence gap that would be really interesting to explore.
Thank you. Does anybody have any sort of pressing questions or clarifications at this stage before we move on with the agenda?
Well, I saw Naomi had a question. Did the research include inquiries as to whether the children surveyed had trees in their backyard or other associations that had already been formed?
Yes, that's interesting. There was one study specifically that did explore that, and that was the study that found that people had a kind of greater spiritual trees has been important, you know, for their kind of spiritual basis or worldviews, focused particularly on trees in people's backyards.
I see I've asked yet another question, as ever. I just wondered if adults with positive childhood experiences actually made sure their children had childhood experiences of engaging with nature and trees.
Yes, that's another interesting question, and came up in two of the studies, which is that adults that had more experience of trees as children were more likely to promote woodland play for their children and have kind of had lower levels of fear about children playing in woodlands.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Okay, well, thank you, Bethan, for that. And we'll move on now to our next speakers, working together now. From the Green Infrastructure team at the Department of Education, we have Crawford Wright, Head of Architecture and Design, and Megan Comble, Lead Sustainability Design Advisor from the DFE. So Crawford and Megan, are you ready to share your screen?
Can you hear me okay, Paul?
You can hear you very well, thanks. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
I can let me just share the screen if that's okay.
Yeah. And as I say, I really enjoyed the previous presentation, Beth, and stuff, particularly on some of the evidence that was being provided, which is great, and it's great to see that information. I'm always being asked for evidence to prove that nature's a good thing. It just reminds me, no one ever asked me for any evidence that poetry is a good thing, or painting's a good thing, or music's a good thing. But everyone's always really interested in some evidence that proves that nature might be. One of the things that I struggle with is some of our more technical colleagues asked for evidence, particularly around that nature could provide cooling for buildings, or something I might go into in a bit. And I like to stand out in the summer heat and get them to stand under a tree and see if that helps. It usually does. We don't need to worry about evidence after that. Just to introduce myself and Megan, we work in the Department for Education. Our team's actually been around for 75 years, so we've been around quite a long time doing our job, which is providing design and construction information for good school buildings and colleges in England for the government. We used to do that and provide support for local authorities and others around the sector, but we mainly do the same for the department itself, as we're the main builder of school buildings, but also for the wider education sector. So I'm going to share this with Megan today, who's our landscape architect and head of green infrastructure, and working on all the different things that we've been working on. What I'm going to do is just run through a number of different projects and just chat about the things that we've been doing, and then Megan will talk a little bit more about some more of the technical information that we've been covering. Paul, just remind me how much time we've got.
You've got until 10 to, so you've got good good half an hour now. You'd
All
have
right,
20
okay.
minutes, but we're ahead of time. So 20 minutes was allotted, but
Yeah.
you've got a bit more time.
Okay, if I'm talking too much, someone will interrupt me and tell me to stop.
I will.
Okay, great. Okay, let's move on, please. Then, okay. So, just a little bit. It's really important about how it's kind of starting point of how we operate as a team. So, it's a multidisciplinary technical team that I lead. It's mostly architects. We've got other professions here. We've got landscape architects. We have engineers. We have furniture specialists. But what we're interested in is the whole school environment and its context. So I came up with this diagram some while ago. It's not comprehensive, it's merely a kind of illustrative idea of the things that go into thinking about a school environment. And I call this the ecology of the school. And it's meant to be a kind of, the ecosystem of all the different elements that go into kind of thinking about school building, but clearly having the child at the center of that. That's really important for us, kind of what we're thinking about and all the complexities that we have to bear in mind all the time. And of course, what's not on here is even wider issues, the global issues, but also political issues, governance issues, who's in government at the time, what government policies are, what education policy is, how much capital investment would go into the school estate, what Treasury's view is. All those different things are also contextual for what we do as a government department. But we've set a particular way of working in this learning cycle, where we set standards for either building programs or for different aspects of construction, such as acoustics. We have what we call building bulletins, which set individual standards, things like acoustics, thermal comfort. In the past, through our 75 years, we've had standards for all sorts of things, including outdoor settings, school gardens, all sorts of different stuff, energy. What we try and do now is what we do now is we also support delivery. So because the department is a direct deliverer of a lot of the investment that goes to school estates, we work with projects on the ground to ensure their delivery, which gives us a touch point with practical aspects. Then we measure quality. We've got a large-scale research and development program and quite a large-scale post-occupancy evaluation program. So we measure the outcomes of what we're doing. We draw on that evidence and we set standards. And we're doing this a continuous cycle. And where we are in the cycle at the minute is we're just about to launch our new standards for 2025, which we'll come to at the end. So next slide, please, Megan. Just going back a bit, and I'm going to take you back kind of through a kind of journey of different projects. Some of them started similar sorts of times and some of them didn't, but it's building up into a kind of case around this. We were lucky to be funded by UKRI to kind of really kind of rethink on paper what could this school of the future, to borrow a phrase, look like. This was back around about the time of COVID, so it'd be like 2018, 2019. So we developed these model new schools. Now they had a whole load of different objectives, but one of them was to increase the amount of biodiversity and green infrastructure and access to outdoors. As it emerged from COVID, that was a really critical issue. Suddenly everyone became aware and realized what would happen if you lost access to outdoors, particularly those that were living in cities and towns and stuck in flats and didn't have unlucky. I am very lucky to have access to a garden, but not everybody was. And we realized how important that was. And where I live in the South Downs was so many people wanted to get outside and queuing along the lanes when they locked the car parks and stuff. So that became a critical issue. We knew that already, but again, it became a kind of public policy issue that we wanted to try and promote. Next slide, please. We then, just at the end of that period, received some funding and we took our Gen Zero desktop research and we built a timber classroom in Scotland from UK timber, unusually at the time using some resources that we had, connections with some Scottish manufacturers, and we built a classroom in Glasgow on the fringes of COP26 and used it as a venue to promote the ideas of biophilic design, timber architecture, and access to the outdoors. We brought some plants in to give this idea. We were to bring people to the classroom, promoted the idea of a different type of school construction away from perhaps the earlier political views of what a school classroom was going to be like after the collapse of BSF. And it's a really good opportunity to show people what we're doing, as opposed to just put it on paper and set those standards. Next one, please, Megan. Another project that then became a kind of touchstone for us, we had in our heads for a while. I mentioned biophilic design. This was a kind of emerging concept, and one of the ideas I had was, well, what if you could develop a biophilic school? So we were kind of thinking about this idea in our heads and what that might mean. And then we had an opportunity. My colleagues in another part of the department who ensure against issues happening in the school estate. There was a school burnt down in Derby, and they rang me up for some advice. Initially, I gave them some advice and put the phone down, but then I rang them back 5 minutes later and said, have you ever thought of doing a biophilic school? And what's a biophilic school? Went through the whole concept. For them, the issue was, would this make the school more resilient? I said, yes, this is the centre of, a kind of resilient design. They said, yeah, we'll buy it. And so we spent 2 or 3 years developing, with colleagues' support, this whole idea of a biophilic school, what that might mean. And we kind of took apart our own standards that developed a one way of doing things and sort of pulled the whole thing apart. But what if we changed our view of what a school design, the building, its access to nature and planting, and how it was built and how it was ventilated, and how the kids moved around the school and how they could be outdoors more often and covered spaces. So we just took all that apart and rebuilt it. And it's been a fantastically successful project. I think for several reasons. One is that the school really bought into the whole idea. The whole school leadership bought into the idea of the biophilic school. So did my colleagues in the department that were funding it. We had support from the University of Derby, who had developed connections with nature, with the National Trust standards, so we were able to use them. And we were able to use it as an evidence base. We had a PhD student who's still sitting alongside, measuring the impact and outcomes from this project. So lots of things came together to make it a really great project, and it's won lots of awards, and we're getting that emerging evidence that it's a really good project in terms of its outcomes that we can use to learn from. Next one, please, Megan. Well, this is one that particularly Megan was involved in. We thought, well, that's taking the whole school concept from scratch and building a biophilic. What if we just take the landscape element and add it to one of our, inverted commas, bog standard schools? And I absolutely love this project. I visited it last year, and we always hear back from schools about how they're not really interested in the landscape, and it's hard to maintain and stuff. And what's lovely about this is everyone absolutely loves it and realizes when you get a great landscape, they want it, they want to keep it, they want to maintain it, they want to support it. And that goes for everybody from the staff, the grounds maintenance staff. Just being in this school environment, it's absolutely fantastic. So a really successful project to showcase the power and the effect of nature and what it can do. Next one, please, Megan. On the other side, slightly more technical side, we developing this idea of the timber classroom, a kind of biophilic design from a construction technical point of view. We really wanted to use much more timber in construction, and this again is a development of our classroom project. So again, we built these 3 pods, one in Hartlepool, one in Coventry, and this one in Shrewsbury, which are made from UK timber. Now, there are no other buildings in the UK constructed structurally from UK timber. So we're real pioneers at doing that, and that's obviously got knock-on benefits for the construction industry, for Scottish forestry, for green skills, etc., in a big way if it can be expanded. And these are real prototype projects for that. So we're really excited about what these can do for us. And we learned a lot about, obviously, building with timber and the technical aspects of that, which are quite difficult to get over from a technical building regulations point of view. But we learned a lot from doing that exercise. Next one, please, Megan. And then quite significantly, of course, new buildings are only a tiny part of the school estate. there are 24,000 schools. We might build 50 a year if we're very lucky with Treasury funding, but you're left with the remaining amount of the school estate. So there's lots of programs we've got which are about investing funding into the existing school estate. And so we've got this pilot project we've been running in Bradford. Again, it came out of the back of COVID, where we were concerned with ventilation primarily, getting outdoors, but also improving IT connections so you can make better use of different sites and people's homes, etc. But increasing resilience through green infrastructure, flooding, and so forth, and generating a little bit of energy, energy generation and a bit of energy efficiency. So we chose 4 sites in Bradford of different school typologies, very small school to a larger school in different sorts of areas, lots of green outdoors, some with no green outdoors. And we've invested about £600,000 per school site in a range of different, what we call low cost, high impact. So the idea is that every school could develop and use if they've got access to some amount of funding. Those are just coming to fruition now, and again, we're hoping to learn a lot from those and what the impact would be on young people and measure the outcomes, and then roll that out further across the estate if it's successful. This, to me, is where our efforts, all of our efforts, should be, is improving that wider school estate. A lot of our time and money goes into 1 or 2 small buildings like St Mary's Biophilic, which is great, but actually everybody needs to benefit from all these different opportunities. Next one, please, Megan. These are just some examples of that. The outcomes. One of the schools is actually, 2 of them are now, I think, finished. So you've got planting, you've got planters on car parks. We've got information boards to support learning, and we've got new gardens in areas that were once just tarmacked areas. Next one, please. We are trying to develop a concept which we're calling Every School a Garden School, where, again, it's building on this idea that we can do more across the estate and break down some of the barriers that we have in terms of thinking about outdoors. And one of these ideas is not a perfect idea, is the idea of a garden school, and that every school can be a garden school, no matter if you're an inner city London school or somewhere in the wilds of Bradford out on the moors. You can have some form of garden. So we're developing this concept, which is something we're going to try and pick up later this year with a little bit of funding to try and push forward and develop some supporting guidance that goes alongside that can help schools deliver the outcomes. Next one, please, Megan. And then take that further. We think that the key aspects to thinking about this is kind of bottom up rather than top down. So we're going to work across a number of different cities to develop some ideas about community regenerative type approaches to thinking about investment in the school estate. Next one, Megan.
I think that's
I'm
me.
hand over to you.
Yeah, can you hear me? Crawford,
Yes,
yeah, great. So thanks for that. It's fantastic to hear about all those projects, and I'm going to continue that journey. Crawford mentioned some colleagues that we have, which are called the Risk Protection Arrangement. They're their own insurance scheme, and basically they come in, like with St Mary's and Derby, and either kind of retrofit or rebuild projects that have been damaged. So I, coming into the Department of Education, recognize an opportunity to deliver some kind of nature-based solutions through the programs that they offer. And in doing that, it's a reactive program. So what I mean by that is schools that have flooded, or have experienced flooding, they come in and do some retrofitting elements to help ensure that they don't flood again. And so with my support, we built some scope and ideas around how we could retrofit those projects with nature-based solutions to deliver flood reduction, to deliver improved air quality. So looking at opportunities around site boundaries and vegetated screens, and also to improve health and well-being benefits of those pupils. So a lot of these areas I'm showing you on site were synthetic grass or tarmac, and we were able to go in and work with schools to deliver these schemes in quite a short turnaround. So from design to delivery, it was a year. And we learned a lot. We learned about what Crawford mentioned, which is a lot of we hear naysayers around having nature and access to nature in school grounds. We learned about what the schools were concerned about and able to work with teams and design teams to deliver really fantastic solutions. And most importantly, the learning we've taken from that, we've built on those standards that Crawford mentioned. we've talked about St. Mary's, which is the primary school in Derby. Well, we're currently exploring quite a big site north of St. Mary's, which is called St. Benedict. It's an existing school site that is around 66,000 square meters. And we're looking to do a retrofit to that project and deliver some both buildings, but also a landscape-led approach to doing so. And in doing that, we kind of are toying with the idea of how those people experience their school environment, and considering that pupils' first experience of public spaces and public buildings is their school, and therefore it's a mini microcosm of what their future life will be like. So using concepts around urban grain and urban development and how we integrate architecture and landscape architecture approaches, kind of exploring some concepts around what different typologies and different landscape characters might offer, depending on how you arrange the building. So here, for example, looking at Garden Suburban, where you might have buildings in the landscape at a domestic scale versus a campus, which is a slightly larger scale, but maybe bigger plazas, bigger spaces, and a farmland, which might be a loose scattering of architectural and landscape elements. But just considering how those kind of treatments might benefit a biophilic environment. And here we're hoping to explore those ideas. And it's quite early days, but we hope to deliver that to get some evidence behind which we might develop future schools. In this same space, Crawford and I have worked hard to kind of deliver and understand a new model of designs for how schools can integrate nature into the foreground. So not just on the perimeters, on the edges, but actually deep into the site. So, setting principles around standards that can deliver things in the same balanced space. And in doing that, rooting nature right up in the foreground of school grounds, making it being about the part of the daily experience, how you set the scene or set the mood as you enter the school and as you leave the school, how you interact with nature in and around the school grounds. And we have aspirations around, students learning, the names of tree species through signage and habitat. So, maybe by the age of 11, we'd love, all children to name at least 10 tree species. And you only do that by integrating it into the heart of the school grounds. We're looking at garden classrooms, about making them those outdoor spaces around the buildings, making them a suitable scale for the users. So considering, age groups from nursery all the way to 18-year-olds, we deal with a huge range of activity levels, requirements, but thinking about those spaces in terms of how you transition between spaces, how you are active, or how you might seek refuge, and how the nature and landscape can do that. And we're also keen to make sure that we make processes, so natural processes, visible, specifically water, so that we ensure that every child understands the role of water in their life or in their environment. So that, I think a lot of times we hide that below ground, but looking for nature-based solutions around that arena. And those projects I've talked about with those pilot projects really helped us illustrate how those can be made visible and educational, entertaining, but most importantly, from a health and well-being perspective. For our teams, our schools out on the ground, there's 22,000 schools. So the National Education Nature Park is a program that empowers children and young people to make a positive difference to both their own and nature's future. And this program is free to sign up. We've had 8,000 schools sign up. And what's great about it is that we get students out there mapping their environments. And when they're mapping it, they're looking at quality, they're making assessments, but most importantly, they're understanding the nature on their own school grounds and helping to make kind of creative decision making. So becoming little citizen scientists themselves in their own school environment and learning mapping skills and natural elements within their world. So that's a free program that offers a great deal of support, guidance, and resources to enable kind of that understanding about nature, both to educate the school users, so the head teachers, the teachers, but also the students. So it's written in a way that kind of communicates to many. And this way, we hope we're starting to shape a world of new standards and new kind of support to schools that enable them to see, and as Crawford started out and no jest at the beginning of this call, that nature and school grounds can be one and the same. And in projects like Merson Park and St. Mary's, we really have seen the benefits, not only from meeting the pupils that you see on screen, the head teachers, the grounds team that are working on it, and how easy this has been to integrate and how complex it is as a landscape. So those gardens are all rain gardens that surround the building. Those trees are both existing and proposed trees that have been put into site. They're all thriving. And most importantly, the students are thriving. They respect it, they understand it. they can communicate about it, and they articulate the benefits of it. They behave differently in the different spaces that the nature sets up for them. So that's something that we've taken away from learning and really built into the future standards of our schools. And St. Mary's does that as well. So you saw some earlier images, and here it is quite early, immature in its plant maturity, but obviously the building is built out. But you start to see the full integration of those kind of classroom gardens or courtyards in between the buildings that are framed by nature, that reap the benefits of site resilience in relation to urban heat island effect, or flood resilience, air quality, acoustics, all those things that we're trying to battle on harsh environments are kind of are here seen as an opportunity and built into the design from early on, and really welcomed by the pupils who respect these spaces, don't trample over the spaces, and use them in different ways than we see in other school grounds. There's a real drive from the head teacher to use the different spaces for kind of restorative gardens, for reading gardens, for active gardens, and kind of physical activity spaces where you might be learning team sports. So these projects, among others, have kind of given us confidence and evidence behind which we can convince our colleagues, but most importantly, school users, that this is an approach that we want to see on future projects. That's it from us. So I'll stop sharing, but I'm sure I welcome any questions. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Megan, and thank you, Crawford. That's wonderful. And a few questions already in the chat, but just in terms of, there's a critical one that Sue asked very early on about, well, COVID, but in general, was the example of St. Mary's, for example. Has it released budget? Is there budget for this kind of work? Is it something that you find is willingly funded?
So yes and no. I think no at the time. I think what we've had to do, we have to be creative is probably the best way of putting it, to try and get this sort of approach delivered. What's happened now is that by doing so, then we could become more mainstream, but and we've been accessed like various small amounts of funding. I think the critical aspect for us is it's always within the context of finite funding. But the great thing about investing in green infrastructure and nature is that relative to building costs, it's cheap. So shifting elements outside and investing in natural infrastructure for me is a win-win, and all the core benefits come from it, apart from the straightforward benefits. So economically, it's a pretty good argument to make. If I'm able to adjust budgets elsewhere and invest in the outside, if we can hold on to those and deliver them, to me, it's a great situation to have.
Yeah, thank you. And just as another quick one as well, was about the pods. The one we had in Hartlepool, Shrewsbury, yeah. Another place. Have they sort of proved useful for additional space in terms of adding a bit to a school?
Yeah, and they are extra space on those schools, because there were new schools anyway, and we added to them, and they had to be for various procurement reasons I won't bore you with. But we are thinking of them as a model now that could be added to a school if a school needed extra additional SEN space, or a new nursery, or all the different government policy things that we're looking at now. These could be a model for doing so. Yeah.
And another general point is, how are these things being showcased? Is there a sort of direct way of disseminating the learning from your examples?
Well, we are working on this next year. As I say, we're launching new standards this year, and then we're working on technical guidance. So we'll publish them during that. They're largely internally focused, but we do what we can to promote what we can within the confines of civil service approach. But as I say, hopefully we'll be developing guidance later this year, which we can showcase some of these things.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. There are other questions appearing in the chat, and you might want to sort of have a go at responding yourself there, Crawford and Megan. I'm going to move on, but there is a really interesting point raised about just the educational use of the grounds and how important that is. One thing to say that it's great, children are using them, students are responding to them, but are they being used as part of the education as well? And for me, coming from the educational point of view, I'm always thinking, well, this education is all very well, but is the school a demonstration of the kind of thinking we've got? So it's interesting. It's coming from
there's a really important question. It's interesting. One of our RSP sites in Bradford, after we'd done the work and developed the project, they were taken over by a different trust, and it's a trust that now has built regenerative principles into everything that the trust does in terms of its leadership, its management, not just thinking about certain aspects of the curriculum or outdoor play. Everything they were thinking about was coming from region, and that completely changed our thinking. But well, it's a shame they hadn't been there at the beginning. We could have really co-created something here really exciting. So it does come down to what largely kind of what the school wants to be able to do, and we can only do a certain amount. But it's down to all of us, and I think somebody was saying it's not really about the school environment. Those are the odd ones. We've all got environments that we can work with in a positive and negative way, and it's all down to us as individuals to be able to respond to that. And it's the same with schools. We are here to lead and showcase, but it's up to those of us that are working in the industry to kind of push forward. And if you're parents, you've got kids at school, yes, to drive that agenda. If there are community assets and community facilities, everyone needs to get involved to be able to do that.
That's great. Thank you. This sort of, it's more sort of holistic approach, that it's not just one angle. You're part of a bigger ecology of work that's going on in the education system, and it's that's a very important part of the message, isn't it? I'm going to stop there because I should be rounding you off now anyway.
Thank you.
And I'm going to move on because we keep a couple of minutes ahead, which is better than a minute behind. And we're going to introduce Freddie Ems from Teach the Future, a campaign that I know Sue, who started the meeting today, and myself, we're both on the Adult Advisory Board of Teach the Future. And Freddie is a campaigns organizer. I know, Freddie, you're in Freshers Week at the moment somewhere, so thank you for giving up a bit of time to join us this afternoon. Over to you, Freddie.
No worries. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'll just share my screen. Is that visible to everyone?
Yep, it's the speaker's view we can see at the moment.
Is that better?
Perfect.
Cool. So I'm here representing Teach the Future, and we're a student-led campaign that is kind of supported by the education charity SOS UK. So we're kind of semi-autonomous in that it's a very much a student-led campaign from the start, but that we have the kind of financial support of that organisation to kind of help us be the best campaign that we can be. So we're a campaign to essentially repurpose the entire education system around the climate and nature emergency and climate justice. So it's an ambitious goal, and we kind of what we're looking to do is to integrate climate and nature across every subject in the school curriculum, because we believe that kind of this is, this is like one of the most intersectional and important issues of our time, and that we know that kind of we need all young people to be able to connect to it through their different interests and through their different kind of roles and kind of subjects that they're studying, in order to be able to make that truly kind of wide intersectional difference. And we want kind of all young people to be able to engage with that and engage with these issues, both through their education and through their wider school environment as well. So our aims are kind of to empower every student, not just to kind of teach them about these issues, because we know that kind of like the science is often everywhere. I mean, it's not taught enough in the curriculum, but we hear a lot in the news about kind of the big headlines in terms of climate and nature decline, and kind of the negative feelings that come from this. It can be really kind of like difficult for young people to deal with. So we know that we need to be teaching about these subjects in a way that is positive and that is empowering, to kind of prepare all young people for this uncertain future, but also to empower them to be able to make a positive difference, and to want to make a positive difference as well, and to kind of see how their skills and how their individual interests can align with the climate nature crisis, and how that really kind of anyone in any sector of society can make a clear difference to these crises in their kind of futures and working lives, and kind of in the present within their schools as well. And then another kind of strand of that is to ensure that this is reflected through the school environment as well. So we want all students to have kind of the opportunity to connect with the natural world through their school environment, as the previous presentation was mentioning, and also to kind of to see sustainability actually in action within their kind of school estate as well, because it becomes so much more meaningful and powerful when you're learning about it in the curriculum and seeing it in practice as well. So in terms of the curriculum first, Oh, and these are just kind of some of the achievements that we've had to date, that I will touch on in more detail, but things like we've facilitated kind of parliamentary debates in Westminster. We've held parliamentary receptions as well to kind of gather support from various members of parliament, and policymakers as well. We also introduced the first ever student written bill to Parliament, which was the climate education bill. That was a few years ago, which gained brilliant kind of cross-party support. It's currently on hold due to the government's kind of big curriculum and assessment review, which is our bigger priority at the moment, but we'll be probably looking to do something more with it in the future. And we've also kind of been involved a lot with the Department for Education as well. We influenced the DFE to kind of we were very much involved in the development and like the implementation of their first ever sustainability and climate change strategy as well. So those are a couple of key highlights over the campaign for the last few years. And then to go a bit more detail into the curriculum and to the work that we've been doing around looking at how we can integrate climate and nature across every subject. So often I think people ask us kind of how nature and climate can actually be in every subject, kind of how can you talk about nature in subjects like PE and things like that, which I think in itself is quite a sad like, indication.
Find it. Thanks very much. It was a long trip, but you found it. Yeah.
And it's quite a sad indication, I think, of how siloed we kind of think about these issues and how kind of we see them as quite separate and not something that's actually integrated and that is kind of quite fundamental to all of our whole kind of society, really, our whole culture. We often see it as kind of something that's niche rather than kind of seeing this narrative about how actually nature is so kind of interconnected and so fundamental to so many aspects of of our society, and we need to really develop that systems wide thinking amongst young people as well, I think, by ensuring that it is very much integrated and the connections are made to all of the different school subjects that they're studying. Because like nature does kind of underpin how we live. It provides like the food we eat, the water we drink, the air we breathe. It's really kind of fundamental to everything, really. So these are a few examples from a project that we did a few years ago, which was called the Track Changes Project, where we essentially brought together kind of teachers, policymakers, experts in various subjects to actually map out and look at how this could work in practice and how we could integrate nature across the various school subjects in the curriculum. So you've got a few examples there around kind of using art and like the power of creative mediums in kind of encouraging people to explore their emotions, explore kind of feelings of eco-anxiety and things like this. And also kind of the power of creativity to spark change as well. I mean, both art and literature really are such powerful tools that really both kind of reveal a lot about our relationship with nature kind of over the years as human beings, and also kind of can be really powerful tools to influence others and to kind of spark change. We talk in English about how we need to have creative writing tasks that are meaningful as well, and that encourage young people to perhaps like write letters to their MPs if they're learning about letter writing skills. The things that actually kind of have that relevance to modern life and to kind of like ensuring that these aren't just kind of tasks that are quite kind of abstract and detached from their real lives, but actually that we're teaching about them in a way that is empowering and that is kind of practical as well, which very much speaks to like a wider point in the curriculum about the need for more kind of real life learning, and we think that climate and nature fits very well into that. And then just to touch on a few of the others with geography, we know that like geography is actually one of the few subjects in which kind of climate and nature are actually taught. But as I mentioned earlier, it's in a way that's very much kind of based on the facts and the science, and it's not really. It's very much the kind of dry and bland. Like I know this from my own kind of personal experiences of studying things like geography and biology. It's taught in a very way that's kind of focused around like memorization of these processes rather than kind of allowing for positive engagement with the subjects and making links as well between the different kind of systems thinking. History as well, and then languages is one I'm especially passionate about because I'm studying languages at university, and I think that like very much I'm someone who wants to go into the environmental sector, but studying something that is not kind of traditionally associated with the environmental sector. But I think it's so important to show that actually, you know, we need people from all kind of areas with all different skills, and I'm hoping to kind of use the language skills that I'm developing through the degree that I'm studying, to kind of become a better communicator about nature and to ensure that we are kind of able to engage the public about nature and the climate through language and storytelling and words. And so I think that's what it's really all about. Is this project is about kind of yeah, ensuring that we are kind of encouraging all young people to see how their skills can be involved and can make a difference. I can also share the link to the full documents that we did that really tracked the ways in which nature can be integrated throughout all of these subjects, throughout the whole kind of current curriculum at GCSE and A-level for some subjects too. So another thing, the next project that we kind of worked on, which has been our kind of main focus for the last year and a bit, was our shadow curriculum assessment review. So this came off the back of the government's review that they launched kind of last year now. And this is kind of an initiative by the government to, it's the biggest kind of review of the curriculum in over 10 years, I think, something like that. And so it's a massive opportunity for us as a campaigner, for us as young people, to ensure our voices are heard and to kind of ensure that the recommendations that come out of this review actually reflect what young people want from the curriculum and kind of create a curriculum and assessment system that is very much relevant to all young people and that kind of works to kind of like prepare all young people for the real world. So what we did was we, as Teach the Future and SOS UK as well, we came together with lots of other youth and education organisations from across the sector, people like the Scouts and DOV and NUS UK. And because we wanted to ensure that our reach was very much kind of broad and not just focused solely on kind of climate and nature related organisations, although we found out very much from our discussions that this is definitely an issue amongst young people, that they want to be learning more about these issues in their education and that they want to be doing it in a meaningful way. But yeah, our review was kind of focused, much as the government's one was, on ensuring that the education system works for all young people, especially in terms of looking at things like SEND provision and different assessment methods and different ways of learning as well. Because we felt that kind of the government's review was not quite doing enough to listen to young people and to take their voices into account. So we set up our kind of a shadow panel of youth representatives from the various organisations, and we mirrored the government's process in terms of holding online workshops, in terms of kind of going around the country and doing in-person roadshows and roundtable events, in order to kind of gather lots of young people's views from all across the country through things like guided discussions and workshop activities. And these thematic roundtables as well with subject experts, where we kind of discussed their recommendations for the curriculum going forwards. And this all kind of fed into our final report, which we published a few months ago. And kind of some of the headline findings of the report, just to kind of go through a few of them. We found that one thing that young people very much wanted was more enrichment in schools, some kind of reason to go to school, really, and in a time when absenteeism is on the rise in many schools. We recommended a guarantee, or an enrichment guarantee of 80 hours across the school year to improve kind of young people's enjoyment at school and their attendance, and that very much links into climate and nature as well, because young people want to be studying things and having those positive interactions at school that are relevant and that are engaging to them. We recommended also better citizenship education, better life skills across the curriculum too, in order to ensure that we are, again, feeding back into this thing about kind of preparing young people for their lives ahead, and for kind of the crises that are affecting our futures, and empowering them as well to come up with these creative and bold and innovative solutions. We wanted more flexibility in assessment methods, especially around kind of reducing stress that young people feel around exams, and allowing for more different forms of assessment as well. And then another key thing was more accessibility and diversity throughout the assessment system and the curriculum. I wanted to kind of ensure that marginalised voices are foregrounded within the curriculum, especially in terms of environmental conversations and conversations in which they're often left out, and also in terms of kind of allowing young people to see themselves reflected in the curriculum too. And then finally about kind of improved access to nature as well for every child and at every school as well, which also links into the next slide about the project we're working on called Fund the Future, which I'll mention briefly soon. But I can also send a link to the final report that we came up with in case people want to read through that in depth. And it would also be very valuable to hear any kind of feedback and reflections on some of these recommendations as well, and to see kind of how you think that they would benefit young people that you know in your lives, and to yeah, kind of how relevant you think they would be, and if this is the right way of going about it. So I mentioned about Fund the Future. So this is a project that we started a couple of years ago, which was focused on kind of complementing the work that we were doing with the curriculum in the kind of school environment as well, the whole entire school estate. So we want all young people to, yes, be learning about nature, but also to connect with it practically in the school environment, because, you know, that place-based learning, seeing what you're learning about reflected in your school environment is so powerful, and makes it much more meaningful and much more kind of powerful to learn about. So we launched this initiative called Fund the Future to call for an increase in funding from the government for retrofitting and rebuilding of school buildings, to again allow students to kind of directly engage with sustainability initiatives in their schools, and kind of incorporating more green space as well. Because we know that kind of having green space in schools, it was again touched on earlier, is so beneficial to young people in terms of providing opportunities for hands-on learning, which was one of the things that young people were calling for through the review that we did, but also as an opportunity to kind of develop a more meaningful connection to nature and to your learning, and kind of be able to take action by kind of helping to work for biodiversity in your school as well. Earlier was mentioned about the National Education Nature Park as well, which is another brilliant initiative, kind of allowing young people to do that and to have these initiatives that are co-led by teachers and students as well is really, really powerful. We know that kind of connecting with nature can have so many benefits for young people academically as well. It reduces stress levels, it improves kind of young people's concentration, and it was also found that especially had benefits for neurodivergent students, like students with ADHD. And we had a student as well recently share with us her EPQ research as well that was on this topic, and that looked into deeper these kind of benefits that connecting with nature in school environments can have for young people, which again I can share the link for if you're interested. And so we were excited that actually the government announced earlier this year that they have committed to doing this, to increasing kind of funding for retrofitting of schools, which is a brilliant kind of success and something that we were really happy to see. It was kind of unclear if this would align with the government's net zero goals as well. So we need to kind of do more work and more advocacy around that to ensure that it will align. But nonetheless, it was a brilliant kind of step to see, and I think it's so important to kind of celebrate the successes as and when they come like that. I also briefly just wanted to mention two other projects that aren't directly part of Teach the Future, but are part of the wider SOS work that we're doing in terms of kind of nature and climate in schools. One of which is the Climate Action Plans project. So the climate change and sustainability strategy that the DOV have advises that all kind of schools in England must have a climate action plan in place from 2025. But like in response to that, we kind of helped design a youth-led project in order to kind of support schools with doing that and give young people as well a meaningful role in actually contributing to their education settings climate action plan. So we trained university students as student staff members to work as climate action plan coordinators, to then work with 24 schools across the UK to kind of build up the knowledge to create their own climate action plans. So schools receive things like themed sessions, free school kind of energy audits, and also visits from local sustainability professionals as well. And this kind of supported them with developing their own plans that were kind of co-created by students and by the climate action coordinators working with SOS UK. And so based on this initiative that we did as a pilot, we're now also developing a resource guide for schools to use to support kind of school leaders and teachers in really embedding youth voice into their planning process, which is so important in ensuring that actually young people's voices are represented in these things that are happening in schools. So I think this really complements the work that we're doing in terms of the curriculum in Teach the Future, because again, it goes back to what we were saying about kind of how positive and really solutions focused education can very much empower students to want to deliver these kinds of initiatives, and to kind of and to see as well as sustainability in action in their schools is a really powerful thing, and can provide that kind of really meaningful like point of action for students to actually engage with on a more practical basis. And then again, Wilding Schools project is another project that SOS UK are working on, which is kind of all about kind of improving biodiversity in schools and in school environments. So that's pretty much everything from me. Just a few photos of kind of recent highlights that from Teach the Future events, because I think we've had some really nice in-person gatherings recently to kind of build that momentum in person. And I think it's so nice to have those kind of opportunities to really celebrate on our successes of the campaign, and to kind of get creative and share that energy and drive that we all have as young people, and that we're all incredibly passionate about pushing this campaign forward as well. So any quick questions, and thank you.
Thank you much. Thank you very much, Freddie. That's great. There was a question that popped up whilst you were speaking about the shadow curriculum review, whether you felt it managed to raise the ambition of the official curriculum review. Do you sense, or have you heard any sort of impact coming through to the one that's being done by Professor Becky Francis?
So we've had some very positive interactions with Becky Francis. Yes, so we've had so she was involved in a few of our kind of roundtable discussions that we held, and we've also the chair of our shadow review, Amira Campbell, has met with her on multiple occasions to kind of share the findings with her, and we also know that kind of she had heard from independent kind of advisors that actually climate and nature in every subject was something that they needed to be pushing for as part of the review, which was really hopeful. I think we're anticipating definitely for climate science and to be much more broadly integrated across the curriculum as a result of the review, which is a really good thing, and to be integrated in more depth as well. We haven't kind of heard much about yet about that kind of pushing for more positive engagement and more kind of solutions centered engagement with young people. So that's probably something that we will continue to push for as Teach the Future. But yeah, there's very much kind of hope from what we've heard so far.
Great. And what more can we do, anybody on this call, to help promote or support Teach the Future? Any asks from you?
So we have a newsletter that we send out regularly that we kind of will talk about our different various projects in that, and we have kind of tailored newsletters that we send out to parents and teachers as well, often with kind of various actions and things that would be really helpful for you to support with in terms of our campaign and things that we're working on. So I would recommend definitely signing up to that newsletter to stay in touch and to hear about those things that we have planned for the future.
Thank you. There are a couple of questions that came forward before the seminar started. Actually, what I'll do is I'm going to drop them in the main chat, and we'll come back to those when we're all in a plenary at the end of the next speaker. So thank you very much, Freddie, indeed. And what's great about this is just talking to Crawford at the end of the last presentation about how there's more than one dimension to think about. You've got to think about them all at once. And so it's great to have the education side so soon built into this presentation today. So thank you very much indeed, Freddie. Thinking of that, actually, what I'm going to drop in the chat quickly is the National Association for Environmental Education Manifesto. It's a couple of years old now, but it's a whole school approach, which is saying what the learners do, what the teachers do, what the school leaders do. And the environment, the school environment, of course, is very much a part of that. But going to move on now to our final speaker, last but not least, Russell Horsey, Director and Urban Forestry Consultant for Woodland Dwelling Limited. Russell, let you take it away.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Freddie. Thank you to our other speakers. Let me just quickly share screen.
Nice backdrop.
There's always a bar in the way, isn't there, when you come to do these things?
Yes.
Okay, hopefully you can see that.
There it is. Yep, that's great.
So, great to talk and hear and listen to all the other speakers, and I'll be kind of cutting across some of the themes they've picked up. Thank you for TDAG for organising this. I think it's something that's been close to my heart. So I'm an urban forester, and I've been doing sort of community work for about 25 years. And so I'm going to be talking about our work with schools, because obviously trees are have the potential to be huge, have the potential to inspire. And I guess are we taking these young people and are we inspiring them to want to work in nature? So in terms of who we are, we're quite a small team, and we focus on urban forestry and community forestry. We're based in Wales. We've got an office in Sheffield, and actually we work all around the UK with different partners. And I think one of the things that has come out even in those last presentations is we're still finding that this element is still quite sporadic. If you're in one of those cities that's been discussed, there is some funding available. Where we tend to work is outside those areas, and there's lots of areas where there is limited money. And in fact, this year I'd say it's become less and less. I guess historically we've worked with communities in areas of where you'd see high deprivation. More recently, we're moving towards looking at areas of low canopy cover, although what we're finding is actually areas of low canopy cover tend to be areas that are high in deprivation. So actually we're not really changing where we work. I think we're just getting more and more metrics to help us with the work we do. I studied in Toronto. I did my master's out there, 98 to 2000. I then walked down the west coast of the States, and my first role was actually a volunteer role in San Francisco, planting street trees with residents. And that NGO, they'd been around about 10 years. They've been planting across San Francisco, and actually thinking back to those early days, we did very limited work with schools, and most of our week was spent trying to find trees, trying to work with residents to get trees to go into streets, and then we'd run community events at the weekend. And families would come out. There's not to say that children didn't come out and engage, but we weren't at the time even considering engaging with schools. And I know that program now has a whole schools engagement program, and I think things have moved on. And I think that's the journey I kind of want to talk through today. I ran the tree team at Bristol for 7 years, and sort of taking those community elements that I'd picked up in North America, I brought those back to the UK, and we set up a program called Tree Bristol. And the idea behind that was recognizing that we were losing trees in Bristol and we weren't replanting. And our focus was around standards and to try and plant more. And we did start to engage schools. And if I'm honest, at the time, I was probably quite proud of the work we did with schools. But I think looking back now, even 5 or 6 years, I think actually we didn't do as much as we could have done. We got schools out, they were there for the photos. I was a tree manager. This was part of my program. And one of the reasons for getting the kids out was because we understood some of those, early benefits that we're hearing more of. Some of that early research was just starting to come out. But actually, we probably didn't do as much engagement as we should have done. We didn't talk to a school. We'd do the design work ourselves. We'd invite politicians out, and you tended to find actually if the school kids came out, the politicians came out, and the press came out for a photo. That was great. But I think that photo on the bottom right there, where actually the kids are interested in the hole and the worm, probably as an urban forester, city manager, I really was desperate to get that tree in the ground. I probably, I hadn't picked up on the fact that actually just having the children engage in the park and dig a hole was really important. And I think what we're seeing more and more of is children are becoming in many areas that they're getting less and less interaction with nature, and actually maybe the tree planting is the way of delivering things, but actually just having them dig a hole, explore, get dirty, pick up a worm, that can equally be as important. I think one of the early things we did learn though, and that photo on the right with the snow, is that when you do get schools out, the kids get really involved. It doesn't really matter what age range. our experience has been, over the decades, is that kids are desperate to plant. In fact, the teachers have to drag them back to school. They love coming out, they love doing things. I mean, if anything, I think one of the things we did learn was that initially teachers are very busy people. They send out stuff to the kids saying, please come appropriately dressed, and then maybe the teachers don't. So I think if you are doing a community event, it's always really worth having a kettle so you can make sure the teachers are nice and warm as well, and maybe a spare set of, fleeces and waterproofs in case they maybe didn't bring them themselves because they were too busy doing other things. Sometimes, though, what we did learn in those early days was that it's not always about getting every single child out. So you've got a picture there of some children planting on what looks like quite an open area. So that's in South Bristol at a place called Hengrove, where there's a massive play park. Initially, the city, when the play park was built, had some trees put in by a contractor, and a group of girls came along and they snapped all those trees. Now it was caught on CCTV. They were taken to court, and part of their community payback, I guess, was they had to come out and plant with us. And actually we worked with the local police, and we had about 15 of the, I guess, the most troublesome children in the area come out and plant. And it was quite eye-opening. They were initially quite skeptical, didn't really get it. We'd kind of taught them through while we were doing it. They started to get stuck in. They started to realize we didn't really care if they got covered in mud, which they thought was quite fun. There was quite a bit of bravado amongst the children. The school wasn't that impressed when we gave them hammers and pickaxes to dig holes and put stakes in. But actually those, trees went in, and no one touched those trees. I mean, if I was another teenager in the area and I knew which children had planted those trees, there's no way I would touch them. So actually getting to a small core of students sometimes can be really helpful in terms of if you have got issues of vandalism, getting to the right people can really be helpful. Fast forward then to 2020, we were doing a project with Neath Port Talbot Council, and they had a nature partnership funding, and they got some funding together to plant 8 schools. And this was literally 3 weeks before the whole of the country closed down, and we were in a different school every day planting. We had to work quite hard at the time, and probably looking back, probably we shouldn't have been in a school every day with what we know, but we were outside, we weren't allowed in the schools, we wore masks, we had gloves which we washed. And again, the kids came out, and the kids, whether they were primary, secondary, they got really engaged. And actually looking back now, for many of those children, for 6 months, possibly a year, this was potentially for some of them the only engagement with nature they got. When we locked down, for many of them, they didn't really leave their homes. They were stuck behind screens. Maybe their parents were trying to work. If you think back to those times, that's quite hard. So for some of these kids, that was literally the bit of nature. And again, we have to think about more things now. We take gloves wherever we go. We take all the tools. A lot of schools don't have access to any of this. What you can see there with the young people is they do have quite a lot of outdoor gear, but many schools don't have that. So, do you need to bring Wellingtons with you? How can you overcome barriers to encourage more people? But, again, by and large, getting the kids involved, they all love it. Kind of going back, and again, we work in generally 4 or 5 areas at the moment, and we've been there in most of those areas now for 5 or 6 years, which means it's good. We can go back, we can start to look. So on the right hand side there, you can see the group of boys that have planted those Scots pine, and then this is sort of 4 or 5 years later, we've gone back and we've released the trees from cages, and the trees have done really well. When the pandemic hit, a lot of schools continued to stay open for key workers. And actually, we were employed to go around and water. Now, initially, this project was about getting the schools involved, but as soon as we heard all the schools were closing, we quickly put in a watering scheme for all the standards that had gone in. But when we first turned up at the schools, we found actually there were quite a lot of kids quite bored, with not much to do. So these were, these are NHS workers, key workers, their children were still in school. So actually we went and brought them watering cans. They wanted to get involved in watering. So again, it was amazing. They were desperate to do something. What, we can go outside, we can water the trees, sir. Is this okay? And they did. And actually that now shows, we've gone back now in terms of the sizes. Again, those trees have really taken. You can tell they've been loved. You can tell they've been watered. There was one school that we didn't get to before we locked down. And actually, we had to go and plant that with local officers from the council, local parks officers. And unfortunately, we did have some vandalism there. That's the only school where we had vandalism because the kids hadn't been involved. But, in all the other schools, there was no vandalism. So that ownership, that empowering the children to look after it has been really, really important. And then talking to the teachers, these are now starting to become a resource. They're starting to go out and do leaf rubbings. They're starting to go out and use it for art classes. They're starting to use it for shade. So, well-designed trees treescapes can be really, really useful, as we've already heard, in an educational setting. And there's a guy, Nick Timlin, who's at Neath, who's the local tree officer, and again, having those individual characters within a local authority is really important, because we find that funding comes and goes, and we find staff can come and go, and having consistent staff is a really good way of just continuing to do things. One of the other areas we're working at the moment is in East Marsh up in Grimsby. So it's a very area of low canopy. It's got about 3% canopy cover, and they're really keen on upskilling. And East Marsh United was initially set up not to plant trees, and we do work with a lot of tree groups, but actually they were interested in buying properties from slum landlords and sort of doing up properties to livable standards. But they recognised that actually they needed to green their area. Their canopy cover is currently 3%. So there was quite a lot of skepticism within the council initially. We arranged a planting in one of the local parks, 30 trees, and working with East Marsh has been really important, because they got to all the people. They did loads of consultation. They spoke to the schools. They started building those networks, and we had about 200 people came out to plant 30 trees. And we've had one tree vandalised out of the 30 trees that were initially put in that park. Off the back of that, working with East Marsh, they wanted to start to do more with schools. They recognised that they needed to inspire the next generation. So we set up a schools project with them, where again we went into 8 different schools, and for a lot of the team at East Marsh, again, they were not used to tree planting. They were not used to doing this. They just wanted to start to build those links. And I guess when you start to do these sort of events en masse and on scale, there's quite a lot of stuff involved. It's really important to make sure that logistics are key. A lot of these groups don't have access to vehicles. We bring access to vehicles. A lot of the groups don't know what 100 standard trees looks like. There's an example of sort of 50 on the back of a lorry. It's really important to know what you're getting. Sometimes the nursery will run out of the tree you ordered and maybe send you a bigger one. That's not great if you're planting with 6-year-olds that they've got a tree that can't be moved around. So again, we can help with these local groups in terms of upskilling. And then we do education. Education has been key part. So as I say, we ran over 2 weeks. We did 10 different events in different schools. We run an educational element of it. So we talk about climate change, we talk about what the trees are doing, and then we show the kids what to do, and then we let them do it, and we let them do everything. It's really important to let them do everything. And the 2 ladies you can see in the picture, those are from EMU. And at the start of the 2 weeks, they were quite nervous. They've not really done anything like this before. And by the end of the 2 weeks, they were running the educational sessions themselves, and they've gone on to do more, which I'll talk about in a second. Sometimes you get some great comments. This was a great one. So why is there a shower nozzle on the bottom of my watering can? Again, potentially showing that disconnection with nature. We found that in a lot of these school sites, when we went round and did the initial meetings, we met eco clubs, which is great. They helped us do the design work. But for a lot of them, they weren't engaging. In fact, we had 3 or 4 schools where, although they had a green space, they weren't actively using it, because there was a lot of antisocial behaviour going on the other side of the school gate, and it was that people were frightened about having the kids out and what people outside would say. So in many cases, we've designed standards for shade, because that's what was being asked for, but also we've put in quite thick hedgerows for the future, because to try and open those green spaces up. So there's, you see schools with green spaces, actually in many cases we're finding they weren't using them because they were worried about antisocial behaviour. East Marsh have then continued to do that. So as I say, we can't be everywhere all of the time, and so we work with organisations like East Marsh United. They've now got a greening team. They're building on those links in terms of that they made through the school planting. They're going back and running art sessions. We've chosen tree species again that give colour, give shade, give shapes. They're going around checking the trees are being watered. We've given watering cans. Watering cans is a really simple fix. If you're working in schools, you may be surprised to find they probably don't have watering cans. If you're spending a few £1,000s planting trees, give them watering cans. The other thing they're doing is they're going back to schools, they're checking on the trees, and what we will do in the future is we'll train them how to do young tree maintenance. So in 4 or 5 years' time, East Marsh will be able to go out with those schools and start pruning those lower limbs and start doing some of that basic tree work to make sure that we get good trees. And again, that's just great for engagement. Technology is how we're also starting to do things. So, we've heard there's various different platforms. It's great to hear other people using education. We're allowing children to go out and plot trees. We're getting them to learn about eco benefits. How much carbon does a tree hold? How much rainwater does it stop? We've just recently done some drone footage. So again, we're starting to share drone footage with people. It's very difficult, I think, in a classroom to visualize what a map looks. As a professional, we might have an idea. Whereas now with drones, we can go back. And so this is an example of an avenue I put into Bristol 50 15 years ago. So we can go and do some drone footage just showing what it's going to look like. You know, what will this park look like, or what will their play area look like? What will trees look like in 15 years after we planted them if they're well watered? And we're finding that's, you know, a really, really great way to engage, but also to inspire. You know, lots of young people quite like technology, want to see more technology. So I think as a sector, we need to do more. Just move on. One of the other things we're starting to do more and more of is actually we were successful recently in we've started growing our own trees. Trees are getting quite expensive to buy, so we've started growing our own trees to keep our costs down, because actually one of the big issues we've got is the cost of planting is going up. So one of the things we're now looking to do is whether we can get groups to come and visit. Groups can start to plant with us, and they can start to see that tree production process. We're also starting to do tree planting. So on the bottom right of the screen, we're doing a project in Newark at the moment with the Woodland Trust and Newark Council, and this is a group called Reach, adults with learning disabilities. And so what we've got there is they've grown on 100 trees, and those trees in a year's time will go out into the community. So again, they're looking after the trees, they've done the planting, they're watering the trees, they're then working with us again on the design. And then what we're hoping with the new greenhouse and also with the new potting shed is it will give us an outdoor classroom. We can allow more people to come and start to grow some of the trees like you see on the line. So I think that's that's where we're going. But there are a lot of challenges. I think funding this year has been an absolute nightmare. You know, a lot of our funding historically has come from DEFRA funds, and those funds have been cut by 80 to 90% this year. There's very limited amounts of funding out there. And as it said previously, I think, you know, there's a lot of places in the UK where there isn't an existing group or there isn't funding available, and how we get funding into those is quite challenging. We're finding it's more and more challenging with some academies. You tend to find that when we first go into schools, that the head will pass you on to maybe the sort of grounds maintenance manager. Their only experience of the children sometimes is they just destroy everything. So when you say to them, we want to come and plant, they're really worried it's going to be safe to allow us onto site. So we have to do an awful lot of work, and that's where, you know, local groups and local knowledge really comes in. So, you know, looking back quickly as to some of those. So here's some 2010, the trees that went in, and then these are the same trees 15 years later. So, you know, even any type of engagement can make a massive difference. These trees haven't been vandalized, they've been well looked after. Again, different picture, same park, different type of tree. You know, these kind of things make a massive difference. So even if it's part of any planting program, I would say get schools involved in some respects. But you know, mainly what we're doing is about inspiring the next generation. We need to see more people out, and we need to see more children engaging with nature. So, Paul, thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Russell. That's excellent. That's of all the talks, that's the one that's closely reflects the my sort of introduction to this whole world of conservation, was planting thousands of trees with small children. Just quick, I noticed you're focusing on standards, and we virtually never planted standards. It was always feathered whips, about 1 meter high, because we could get, you know, whole hedgerows in and what have you, and children could plant them safely. Do you do that, or what? If not, why not?
So we're finding that schools have got less and less space for woodland planting. We tend to find maybe 1 in 20 schools has space left because probably they've done it already. Maintenance is a key consideration for many schools. They just don't have the money to manage what they've got. And so if we're proposing lots of trees, which are going to cost a fortune in the future, they're just not interested. So the standards we generally put in at final spacings, as I showed you with those avenues, so they've got space to grow. There's minimal sort of maintenance costs going forward. We are doing hedgerows, you know, and we will put hedgerows alongside to sort of for pollution issues. I do have some photos. There's a historic, we're seeing all these tiny forests going in. I'm not a big fan. I was back in a park in Bristol last week, and there was one planted from the late 90s. The authority doesn't have the money to maintain it. Underneath is dark. The squirrel is full of squirrels, and they've kind of destroyed all the surrounding larger trees by stripping the bark. So I think we need to, I guess my background as a tree manager for a city means I'm always quite thoughtful about what are these things going to cost in the future. And our experience is if you plant less and maintain more, you'll get more canopy and better shade and things like that.
Right. There was a specific question about My Tree. Have you incorporated that into your program?
My Tree.
Yeah, name is asked, have you tried incorporating My Tree, which is a youth-friendly, works on a smartphone? So I guess we're talking about an app.
No, we haven't. I guess we're using Tree Plotter as our app to work with it, but I guess there are lots of different apps out there. I think any app is great to include. So yeah, Tree Plotter does that for us.
Right. And before I go and open up, just last one about resistance to tree planting initially. Do you come up against people who say absolutely, well, no, and why not?
I think the academies thing has become quite challenging because the schools, the teachers want to do it, the kids would want to do it. The grounds maintenance teams are worried about future costs, and therefore there's quite a big barrier to get across there. I think once you're in and once you're doing it, and the school's seen the benefits, I think it becomes much easier. But yeah, initially it can be quite challenging, we find. And we had a site last year in Northampton. We thought we had everything agreed. And then 4 days before we were due to plant a lot of trees, including a large woodland area, their contractor informed us they'd found newts at one part of the site, and unless we had a natural England license, we couldn't go ahead. And so we had to pivot somewhere else. So I think, yeah, it's again a good example, I think, of a grounds contractor not really wanting to manage what we designed, even though the school wanted it, and so found a reason to try and stop us doing it.
Right. Okay, thank you. That's interesting. And what we should do now is ask the other speakers to turn on their cameras, because I'm going to open up to a wider panel. Thank you. Hello again. To Bethan. Is Freddie still with us?
Yep. Hello.
Yep. There you are. Oh, yeah, you are. Sorry. Yep. Hiding behind my other bits and pieces on my screen. Okay. And so if people would like to ask a question, I can't look at the screen and the chat, so I'm going to ignore the chat now. If you've had a question in the chat that you're burning to ask, please do put up a hand or a yellow hand, or just shout out or something so that we get your question back out. And straight away, nice comment there. Fantastic and inspiring presentations. Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks everybody for those. We seem to have lost, oh no, Megan's there as well. And is Crawford still around?
Yeah,
he have to go off?
Sorry. I'll check on Crawford. Apologies.
Okay.
But I'm happy to take any questions, so no problem.
Oh, sure. Okay, thanks, me. Okay, so yes, well, thank you very much then. And questions from the groups. Anybody wanted to raise a particular point with any of the speakers?
Paul, Samantha put a question, Samantha Dobby, but she's in her office, so she can't ask it herself. Are there case studies being showcased to multi-academy? Are these case studies being showcased from multi-academy trusts and classroom teachers, or being shown to multi-academy trusts and classroom teachers? The lack of time and demanding day-to-day often means the landscape can get missed. As an ex-teacher, this slideshow would be super inspiring and motivating to shift priorities. How do you canvass the
great point?
What's
Yeah,
been
how do you
achieved?
canvass multi-academy trusts? Which is the point we just ended on there, wasn't it? Was, I guess, is that from the DFE or from others' points of view? Who's got it encountered?
I mean, I'd love to know where we should be presenting. I worry that I'm presenting to other green professionals today, which is brilliant because I think all green professionals need to do more with schools. But I guess to DFT, it would be lovely to present to those academies at their conference. Do we know what it is? Do we know where we should be taking that information forwards?
Good point. Megan, you're going to say something?
I'm just going to say that, like, I think it's exactly right that we tend to talk to people like us, and that's an easy convince. And it's something that we, as you know, Crawford talked about some publications that we want to get out later this year around every school, garden school, and what that might look like. And, you know, try to get, we do outreach, but oftentimes not to, obviously to educators, but not all educators. And some of the pilot projects I'm running is to work out what the boundaries are that people are, like what their line in the sand is, to understand what the issues are. So I think comms is something we hope to send out in the next year. But I also think, more live projects, more awareness about it. I saw yesterday, you know, the Tape Britain is doing a school classroom. You know, there's more conversations about how nature and tree planting can engage. And what I'd like is these case studies to show from, because I think one thing I picked up in the chat is that people's concern that teachers don't have a lot of time. And my husband's a teacher. I actually trained as a teacher. It's my first degree, and then a landscape architect second. So I'm full aware. And I think one of the things I'm trying to encourage in our new standards and specification is passive education. And that's when I talk about making things visible in a fun way. Also, you know, if we kept, and I'm
would like all future trees to keep labels on them and some signage around it, so that at least people who are interested can have some passive educational elements around them, just so they're learning through kind of osmosis, if you will. So we're not always relying on a teacher-led approach, but a student-led approach is appropriate in some cases. So I think it's two-pronged, really.
Thank you. Now, I noticed some interpretation on one of the school sites that it's yours, Egan, or Crawford slides. I thought they look quite professional, actually. I was wondering if there's another opportunity there for the class students to be involved in interpreting the nature areas that they've been involved with putting in. As you say, it's a lasting bit of passive education. The question in the chat, which I've dropped in there, that came before, was about how local authorities and charities can get this type of education into schools. And I guess that is that similar question, because the way into schools these days tends to be through, if not local authorities, then through multi-academy trusts. So we are up against that one. And the other one was a bit more specifically about attracting this industry. How do you get conservation, surveying, woodland management into the various parts of the curriculum for children, and certainly for older children thinking about their careers? I mean, Freddie, has there anything been there on the green careers side? Teach the Future, have they come up with, is that within the track? I should know about the track changes. I was involved in it myself, but do you have anything to add on that question?
I would say it's difficult because especially kind of teachers at the moment with the curriculum is very kind of saturated. So one of the things that we've been trying to do is to integrate it more within the kind of fundamental aims of subjects, and the kind of what like the kind of the skills that the subjects are teaching. So it's so kind of more like like the idea of kind of green skills and green careers. We would argue that kind of every skill kind of needs to be a green skill, and every career needs to be a green career. So kind of trying to it's like trying to make those links to conservation kind of through various subjects, and kind of through like kind of creative engagement with conservation, the science and practical application of conservation in science and geography was one of the things that was touched on in the track changes, and then also kind of the wider cultural implications of it as well. So yeah, it's very much about kind of trying to integrate it more within kind of what these subjects are actually trying to teach young people, in terms of kind of becoming more like aware of kind of the cultural kind of resonance of these issues, and yeah, and trying to make it very kind of based within the skills that these subjects are teaching.
Right, yeah, so it's that sort of higher level, thinking about strategically, what are you trying to do education for anyway? Yeah, the purpose of education, it is, if you can just shift that a little bit to be a bit more about a sustainable or regenerative economy rather than just an economy, we might be getting somewhere, and all this work would be so much more valued. So yes, hopefully, well, all strength to your work with the curriculum assessment review, because that's part of where that comes in. There's a question just popped up there about planning covenants, how they could start specifying greening in schools as part of developers' obligations. Has anyone come across that?
Yeah, I mean, I was in charge of Bristol at the time when academies were just starting, and all that estate was just going across. So in many cases where there are academies, the land is still owned by the local authority, and there are usually covenants to say you can't remove stuff. I think the problem we see with a lot of the PFI schemes specifically is that, you know, the contractors were paid X amount on day one to manage X amount of stuff. And if you add stuff to it, the costs to then maintain them, even if there's only 5 years left on that 25-year contract, can be so astronomical that really puts teachers off. We had a case where, you know, it took a teacher 5 years to get permission to put a downpipe, to take the water from a downpipe into a water butt, you know, because they were worried it might fall on a child and hurt them. Sometimes I think these contracts are not made to green, and I think that's where local authorities potentially can really look at this, is as a lot of these PFI schemes come to an end and contracts are being renewed, we really need to look at making sure this green element is a significant part of these contracts, and these contracts are not going to stop you greening the schools, because that really does put schools off that are desperate to do things. They just can't see their way through the legal nuances.
Yeah, it's crazy that we sort of legislate against it almost. It's back to the purpose of why is a school there.
Yeah, completely.
Yeah. There was another question about whether there are research gaps that we'd like to see more evidence. I mean, that's a kind of question to everybody, but for the panel as well, are there research gaps that you feel, yeah, could somebody please help us prove something, find something out for us? Do we see research gaps of things we'd like to know more about?
I think it's a gap for us and for me as landscape architect. And the challenge that we have is around urban heat island effect and the impact that is having on students and pupils. And we know that trees reduce heat. That's, no one's arguing that. I think that's obvious. But what's potentially a frustration and a gap in knowledge is its application in the built environment. So engineers, how they are calculating their sun, so they're able to use louvers or shade devices on buildings to ensure that sun is mitigated in terms of its urban heat island effect, but trees aren't part of that calculation. And I think if we could somehow get some scientific research around that element and a kind of a way to control that testing, and my engineers in our team are super, and they're willing to, we are writing our guidance to understand and make allowances that trees are providing shade to the built environment, to the buildings themselves. But I think it's just a missing piece of legislation or kind of scientific research that enables an engineer to understand that a tree at 30 years outside of a building will provide X amount of shade. And so maybe it's a two-pronged approach between building devices and natural devices to help ensure that the overheating doesn't happen within the school indoor environment. So that's something that we'd love to get some science behind. There's science behind it, but a mechanism to measure it is what would be helpful, because then we'd see more trees in courtyards because we have more justification for why they're there.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so we can be looking at mature trees which are there now, but also it's a bit like the question about the impact of all this nature education on the adults, and the sort of longitudinal studies which are so hard to finance to organize, but both in terms of the impact of having a great environment in your school and the impact of that environment over time. I wonder if any of us would be citizen scientists for about 20, 30 years to be able to start gathering data now, because I don't see anybody actually giving you the grant for it right now, but perhaps it matters. It's how we craft the proposals for that research. But,
Paul, can I just say,
yes,
we've put our Trees and Design Action Group First Steps Guide in Urban Heat into the chat. There's quite a lot going on with trees and cooling buildings, and also the impact of trees on the spaces outside buildings, which also need to be cooled. And there are people doing it. So Megan, I'm quite happy to send you some links to things that are specifically happening. But things like Part O of the building regs, I don't know if they apply to schools, won't allow trees as the cooling, as a part of the shading mechanism, because they say the trees might go, whereas the blinds and shades won't.
I argue that. I think that they can go. We see blinds fail and shade
exactly.
fail. So I think it's for frustration. And I think that's my issue, is that there should be a mechanism of measurement that allows for something to fail, but to have the opportunity for trees to participate in that conversation is what I'd love. And that's the frustration. And I talk to people at UCL all the time about it. It frustrates me to try to get some better science out of their teams, because they have, some top scientists and, testing mechanisms that, would be great to get from. But yeah, thank you.
Can I pick up? I think we're seeing more and more of that, actually. I think when we go and talk to schools and the eco clubs as to what are their biggest issues, they've all got these massive hard playgrounds with no shade. And the teachers are worried about having to put suntan lotion on the kids, and the kids are getting burnt. And so actually, I think a specific piece of picking up on what TDAG's done and then making it school specific. The trees do so many things, but actually, flooding and heat and burning of children tends to be where we're having the most, the most impact in terms of changing that previous question about, how do you change minds? It's through those specific areas.
Oh, there's Naomi got a hand up.
Thanks for wait a minute. Thanks very much. There is a lot of research available on the iTree Tools website in terms of documenting the ecosystem services that trees do provide. So, and another resource that's outstanding is Dr. David Nowak and all the research that he has done, which is published by the USDA Forest Service, and it's all open source. There's no issue in accessing it in terms of everything that trees do for us. So it's well established. It's purely a matter of, are you willing to prepare a site that a tree can actually grow in? That's where it begins. It doesn't begin with the tree selection. It doesn't begin with the planting or the establishment. It goes back to site preparation. And if you are willing to do that and provide an adequate, accessible volume of living soil, you can grow a tree. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Naomi. Nice and succinct as well. Powerful message. So provide the soil, it will grow. I could also add the community element of that is the involvement of people in all of this. So I was struck by the green school plans that you were sharing earlier, Megan and Crawford, and comparing that with, say, Russell's work on involving people in tree planting. I'm just wondering how much of that really is combined. Were those green schools built and prepared with a lot of involvement of the community, or was it something that the contractors just did it and you walk in and there's your school ready?
I guess is the question, are children involved in the planting or design of the school?
Design and planting, yeah.
I think in terms of Mersum, it was a new school, so it was a bit trickier. I know that with the Derby school, St. Mary's, that school in particular, because it had been burnt down, all the children were being reschooled in another institution or nearby. So I know that they were participants in the design. In terms of planting, it was before my time, so I'm not quite sure if they were planted out, but it is something that we are eager to know more about. And I guess one thing about St. Mary's is we did do a post-occupancy evaluation, and we did give some super simple exercises where we asked them where their favorite places were. And almost every single one of them were choosing, everyone's convinced that a multi-use games area, the Muga, is the highlight of every kid's school day, but it was always the adventure playground, which is heavily tree planted in a quite natural setting, and the different courtyard gardens. None of it was indoors, none of it was under the shelter, the spine we call it, that connects the buildings. It was always these areas, which is heavily influenced what we're trying to do in terms of kind of a multi-use gaming area where you're trying to do both tree planting, physical activity, maybe some equipment, but it's a daily mile, for example, but it's not kind of reliant on the Muga. So I guess what we're doing better is that we're assessing what the students want based on this evidence, and maybe in the future we'd like to involve them. And we're not always heavily involved in that process, but it's something we're looking into a bit more. So hopefully that helps to start the conversation, but definitely more work and more things to explore in terms of how we can do better at that.
I think it'd be really cool if we change the contract so that the whoever's won the contract builds the school, gets the grass to where it's the grass, and then we hold on and we do that tree planting, shrub planting with the kids. Because it would deal away with one of the biggest issues, which is you see these schools being built and they tend to generally be finished in July, and then they stick all the trees and shrubs in July. No one waters them, and then by the time the kids come back in September, they're all dead. So the first thing the kids have in the new school is all these dead sticks everywhere. So it would be great if Department for Education recognised that, maybe that element should be, you build the building, you build the Mugger, you build everything else, you build all the hard stuff, you get it back to grass and soil, and then at the right time of year, you come in and plant the rest of it with the kids.
I mean, you say that, and we have in the new standards been really specific about planting in specific seasons. So in some ways it will naturally happen. We haven't been explicit enough to say who's doing it, but the students will see a site that's soil and see a site that then has a tree. That in itself is knowledge. I think, like I said, there's more work to do to how we integrate the children into that process, but definitely trying to get the right season, because that is a bugbear. And I also would love it if through the nature park and the valuation of these sites, that we get kids who are telling us that things are dying or not surviving. So we're getting kind of that application of knowledge to say, hey, that tree that you put in last Christmas it hasn't done anything, especially if they're monitoring it. And that's actually quite a powerful tool. And so I'm hoping, and I've asked for all maintenance, landscape and ecology maintenance and management plans to be written in layperson's terms, and to have activities that students can participate with, because actually that is more as important to me. So we have done some work about that aftercare and involving them and getting them to map it and study it, because I think that's quite powerful to watch something. And I've heard that from students about watching a tree grow, watering that tree. So we've asked for trees to have water bags on them so they can poke them, they can figure out if they're how much water, there's an educational element to it, and they can participate in that. So it's been quite something, we've worked hard to kind of develop into our guidance and into our standards.
I think also taking kids to the nursery to pick the trees. So we've done this with community groups.
Yeah.
I've yet to find a way of funding it to take the kids. So, we've taken community groups to nurseries so they can learn how their trees are growing, and then they pick the trees that they're then going to plant. That has a massive impact too, but we've never managed to get the educational side to fund a nursery trip for the kids. But again, brilliant if we could.
Yeah.
Baby steps. I got to get the trees in the right places, and then and to get them maintained to a level that they're establishing well. These are my goals, and then the next step is how we involve children. If I did everything at once, I could retire tomorrow. So no, it's not true. It's baby steps for us.
Thank you. I think with 5 minutes left, I'd just like to ask the speakers, and if they've got a sort of a final message, a takeaway, something you'd like to share before we wrap up. I'm going to hand over to Sue to talk about the forthcoming seminars, but just a last word from each of you, even if it's just a thank you very much and goodbye. Shall I go around, and I'll start with Bethan?
I don't think I have anything particular to add, just what's an interesting discussion this been, and really interesting to hear such a range of perspectives about schools and different kind of stakeholder groups, I guess, in education. So I look forward to kind of hearing these different initiatives and ideas evolve in the future.
Thanks, Bethan. I'm going this order of the speakers. So Megan next. Don't see Crawford.
Yeah, no, I had a colleague said the other day, wouldn't it be nice to move away from the 2 T's? And I said, what is that? And they said, tarmac and turf. I'm like, oh yeah, because that's usually what we see on school grounds. And I guess for me, I really am hoping to create a much more variable and dynamic landscape in courtyard gardens and garden schools for children moving forward. So we'll see. And obviously we need to do a lot of outreach and some publications, but we're hoping to create that positive space for pupils in the future. So thank you for having me today.
Thanks, pleasure, Megan. And Freddie.
I think for me, it's just really inspiring to see kind of the different projects kind of working across this space, because I think what we do really need is this kind of joined up approach, like kind of lots of work in terms of both kind of integrating nature throughout the whole school kind of experience within the curriculum, within the school grounds, within kind of like young people's day-to-day lives. And I think that it's really kind of inspiring to see, to hear about all of the work that the other kind of panelists are talking about and working on. And yeah, I think, like Bethan, it's just been a really good conversation, and really glad to have been involved. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Freddie. And Russell.
So yeah, thank you for the invite. And I think to me, actually, the next 5 years is the time to be hitting this, because I think there are a lot of these massive contracts coming to the end of their 25 years. And actually, the contracts that go out for the next 25 years, which they probably will do, we need to get them right now, because that, now is the right time to influence. So, hearing some of the stuff that's going on, hearing some of those influences, is really exciting. It's the right time to be with this agenda. Thank you.
Yes, and so it's going to. So your work's cut out. You've got a lot of dissemination and lobbying to be done to get this across to all the right people in high places. I'm going to hand over to you now. I just want to say thank you very much to all of the speakers. You've done a great job. It's been inspiring for me too. And say, Russell, you've not just been speaking to the Green Lobby. We might be heartily involved, certainly Freddie and I. but we're focused on education always, and just to hear that from the landscape perspective and the work that you've all been doing or you've been researching, Bethany, it's been really encouraging to put that together. Lots of hand claps there for people who found out how to do that on Zoom. So Sue, over to you.
Well, firstly, thank you to all the speakers, but especially thank you to Paul for chairing this. And yes, to reiterate, Russell, we got out of the echo chamber because they're looking at the names. We've got representatives from all those partner organizations, which is excellent because they're all the people that are going to help drive some of these things forward. I've put our next seminars into the chat, and I will collate the chat into some sort of sense, and it will be on the website as a PDF. And if speakers, you send your PDFs of your presentations, I've got yours ready, but others, we'll make sure they're on the website too, along with the recording. And we are starting to think about what we should be talking about next year. So if anybody has any ideas, please email me and let me know, and we'll put them into the pot, and then we'll have a big think about what to do. But all the topics for this year have been driven by people who support TDAG seminars. So it's really important that we are actually reaching out to people who are wanting the information. So thank you all very much, and tea time, you see.